Hi, I am Dr. Claudia Pollen. I am the Center Director for the Consumer Unit Trust Society, uh, which is CUTS International Lusaka. As you might be aware, CUTS International is very concerned about Zambia's debt management and sustainability. And at the core of this, as CUTS, we are majorly concerned about enhancing consumer well-being. And as you might be aware, one of the biggest issues that this country has been facing and that has affected the fiscal expenditure has been the unsustainable debt management, which has been sort of promoted by the fact that government has been hugely borrowing and spending without necessarily having clear reasons behind why certain expenditures have been done. And as you can imagine, this has affected social sector spending. And, the social sector is actually quite core in terms of humanizing the needs. This is where every person needs to have access to education, every person needs to have access to healthcare, and even access to things like water and sanitation. These form the basis of human well-being. But unfortunately, because of these debt obligations, what we've noted is that these key sectors have actually been outcrowded by spending on debt repayment. So what we'd like to see is, as CUTS International, as the CSO Debt Alliance, is to see a budget that is responsive also, that is putting at the core of its mandate consumer welfare. We are very much aware that we have a constitutional obligation to ensure that debt is repaid, but we would also like the government to be quite responsive in making sure that citizens are not affected in the process of repayment as has happened in the past. Indeed, Zambians are feeling the crunch. We've seen high inflation levels, and even when the kwacha has appreciated, we still have consumers are experiencing high food prices. So what we'd like to see in this new budget is a more responsive budget that centers human welfare, consumer welfare at its core. Thank you.
My name is Nalucha Nganga Ziba. I'm the country director for ActionAid Zambia. In terms of the upcoming budget, our expectation is that we'll see increased allocation towards climate change as well as environmental management in the country, considering that for the past successive 5 years, the combined allocation towards environmental protection has been below 2% of the overall national budget. And this defeats the effects of climate change on the ground when it comes to families getting displaced, as well as affecting livelihoods. Therefore, we are quite hopeful with the creation of the new ministry that it will be followed with adequate resourcing and financing, as well as we hope to see the climate change bill being tabled in Parliament in the next legislative calendar come early next year. Our expectation is that with increased budgetary allocation, we'll be able to afford financing in terms of addressing long-term impacts of climate change in communities. One of the ways we have seen how climate has affected communities, for instance, here in Lusaka, we have seen perennial flooding every year in certain compounds. Therefore, there is need to allocate more resources towards addressing the drainage issues, as well as accommodation, ensuring that people are putting up houses that are environmental friendly in the context of climate change. For the rural areas, we have seen how climate change has affected, especially areas that are in ecological zone 1, that is mainly Western, Southern Province, Central, and parts of Lusaka and Eastern Province, where they've been in droughts for over 3 to 4 years now. So what that has happened is that it has reduced their crop yield, as well as affected livelihoods at household income. And we have even seen increased migration from those areas where those who are involved in farming mostly are now migrating to areas which are in ecological zone 2, where they're having adequate rainfall. But also in areas, in situations where we have more rainfall than anticipated, we are seeing floods again, which are affecting crops as well as people's livelihoods, including animals. And then there's not much efforts when it comes to harvesting of that water that we receive during floods for possible reuse and redeployment in the agriculture sector. So we are hoping to see modern technologies launched at community level to be able to assist communities in terms of mitigating the long-term impact of climate change on their communities and areas. This has also led, unfortunately, to even a lot of girls and youths dropping out of school, largely because schools become inaccessible, and the damage which is left to the school infrastructure is also usually unbearable. For border areas such as Sesheke and Nakonde, where we work, we have also seen high migration where a lot of young girls are migrating into Namibia and Tanzania to go and work as house helps in an effort to try and put food on the table for their families, largely due to the effects of climate change and not being able to afford food, as mostly these communities are agriculture communities and they are dependent on rainfall patterns in the country.
My name is Pamela Chisanga, and I am Country Director for WaterAid here in Zambia. WaterAid is a non-governmental organization that works with communities, particularly in rural areas and peri-urban areas, to increase access to water, sanitation, and hygiene services. For the 2021 budget, our expectation is that there will be an increase in the allocation to the water sector budget. We know that the country is currently constrained in terms of resources, but we are hoping that we can see an increase to the water sector budget because of the costs that we have to face as a country when we have epidemics such as cholera. You will agree that, preventing diseases is much, much cheaper than actually treating or managing or dealing with an epidemic. So investment in water, sanitation, and hygiene services. Our expectation for the 2022 budget is that there will be an increase in the allocation to the water sector. We also expect that we will be able to ring-fence funds for the water sector because over the last 10 years, we have noted a trend where the budget that is allocated to the water sector is actually not released to the water sector. So you have a low budget that is provided, but then also you have funds not being released to the sector. The reason that we would like to see an increase in the budget allocation to the sector is because it is very costly for the country to deal with the consequences of not having access to water, sanitation, and hygiene services. We know diseases such as cholera thrive when there is no access to clean drinking water and when people do not have access to adequate sanitation services. So providing these services will help us prevent these diseases and also help the country to reduce costs that are inevitably incurred when we have to respond to an epidemic such as cholera.
My name is Miti from the Alliance for Community Action. As the ACA, what we would like to see is a budget that focuses on the basic needs of ordinary people, especially those in the rural areas. We are hoping that for the first time in Zambia, a change of government is going to improve the lives of the people at the bottom rather than improve the lives of people who are in power and maybe the elite needs of those in town. So we have a country which we ran with ordinary people in rural areas living without very, very basic needs, just a school. And so we hope that this is more of a social budget. And more importantly, we hope that when money is allocated in the budget, it doesn't remain there as a figure in the yellow book, but is transparently and accountably disbursed down to the rural area. So accountability is extremely important. It is something that we've been missing so that our budgets really become academic and do not improve lives.
Hi, my name is Betha Chulu. I am an adolescent health activist. Zambia has made a number of commitments with regards to sexual and reproductive health and rights in the International Conference on Family Planning and Development. Some of these commitments speak directly to young people, such that they have been contextualized and domesticated in the 2015 National Youth policy. The need for access and uptake of sexual and reproductive health and rights services by young people can never be overemphasized. And the importance trickles down to young people in rural areas. If we have to alleviate and eradicate teenage pregnancies and child marriages, we have to ensure equitable access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. My expectations in the 2022 national budget is to see an increased budgetary allocation to the relevant line ministries that seek to enhance activities that will speak to promoting the access of sexual and reproductive health and rights services by young people in rural areas. That is the Ministry of Youth, Child and Sports, as well as the Ministry of Health, to have enough funding to be able to conduct activities on the facility level. With that being said, I am very confident that the national budget that will be presented to us this October month end of 2021 shall cater the needs of adolescent health in all parts of Zambia. That is to achieve a healthy and youthful Zambian population.